Since becoming Pope, Pope Francis has emphasized the importance for our church to be merciful. He has talked about God's mercy, how infinite, how gracious it is, and how we have to be merciful as God. And Jesus came to teach that same message, how to be compassionate, understanding, and merciful, particularly to those who are suffering in this world, those who are marginal, those who are excluded. We need to reach out to them as Jesus did. And that's the topic of my homily today. How can we reach out to victims of domestic violence? Now you might ask, well, why are we talking about domestic violence? We don't see it that much. It happens behind closed doors, in secret. So we think it doesn't happen that much in our communities. But actually, the studies show that domestic violence is rampant in the United States. The Center for Disease Control says that 1 out of every 4 women is either hit or sexually assaulted by her partner at some point during her life. And that's astounding. The FBI says that a woman is battered in the United States every 15 seconds. During the Vietnam War, there were 58,000 Americans that died in that war. But in that very same period of time, 54,000 women were murdered by their partners right here in the United States. And more recently, during the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan, between the year 2000 and 2006, there were 3,200 Americans that died in those 2 wars. But in those same 6 years, 3.5 times that many women were murdered by their partners here in the United States. So it is a huge problem. And of course, it's a problem that affects our young people as well. In Chicago, 1 out of every 5 high school junior girls said that she had been hit on a date, just in a study 2 years ago. And just recently, the American Association of Universities came out with a study that showed that 1 out of every 4 college girls during her 4 years in college will be sexually assaulted or harassed. So these are astounding statistics which make us think, well, it's here among us. And undoubtedly there are some people here today listening and participating in our celebration who are victims, and our heart goes out to you, and we hope that you are free from that violence and that your wounds are healed. Of course, we know that men are also victims of domestic violence, but they're a small minority. Maybe 1 out of 10 is a victim. They're not very good statistics. So my intention is to include men, but I'm speaking primarily about women. Now, we know that it happens in every community. We might think, well, we live in an idyllic community. Doesn't happen here. But again, the studies show that domestic violence happens at the same rate in almost every community in the United States. So it makes no difference if you're black or brown or white, or if you're poor or rich or live in the city or the suburbs. It seems to happen at the same incidence everywhere. So we know it is here. Now, some women might think, well, they're not victims. They may not realize it. They might make excuses for their husbands. Oh, I live with a difficult man. He tends to get angry. And I have to be careful what I say, not to push his buttons, not to set him off. Or perhaps because she's never been hit, she thinks she's not a victim of domestic violence. But domestic violence is much broader than just physical violence. Its definition is any pattern of behavior which seeks power and control over another person. And that power and control can be exercised in different ways. It can be physical, but it can also be emotional or verbal. It can be sexual and economic. I think we all know what physical violence is. No, punching somebody, slapping them, pushing them, kicking them, pulling their hair, throwing things, many ways. Emotional or verbal abuse is much more difficult to detect There are no bruises on the skin, no broken bones, but it happens more frequently. And many women says it hurts even more because it's so devastating to the human spirit. All the insults, the constant criticism, the excessive jealousy, isolation from family and friends, many different ways. Economic abuse happens primarily among women who don't work outside the home. And so they're dependent upon everything in order to maintain the house and take care of the children from what their husbands will give them. And if the abuser does not want to share, he can demand what he wants from his wife or his victim. Sometimes women will have no idea how much their husbands make or where they bank or what investments they have. Or maybe they will be indebted. Sexual abuse is perhaps more common today than in previous years, largely because of the easy access to pornography on the internet. So some men will watch it and then oblige their wives to watch it and then imitate it. And most women find this disgusting. Or perhaps it's forced intimacy or intimacy denied. Or perhaps infidelity. Some men don't think anything of it. So there are many different ways. I'll tell you a story about a man who called me very insistently on a Friday afternoon. He wanted me to talk with him and his wife, and I couldn't do it until Sunday in the chapel after Mass. He said, "Father, I want you to talk to my wife here. She's been very unfaithful to me. She's always looking at other men." But this week was the last straw. I came home and I found the back door of our apartment open. I know there was a man in my house, Father. I went out into the yard and I saw my neighbor by the alley, and I asked him if he had seen somebody back there. He said he thought he had. I know there was a man in my house, Father. Talk to her. So I asked him to step out, and I said to her, has he always been this jealous with you? "Oh, Father," she said, "we've been married 10 years and we have 3 children, and his jealousy has only gotten worse." Well, I said, "When you were dating him, was he jealous then?" "Oh, yes, he was." Well, I said, "Well, why did you marry him then?" Well, she said, "I thought once we were married, we'd be together day and night and the jealousy would disappear. But it hasn't." And I said, "Well, that's because it's not jealousy. This is his way of exercising power and control over you. He gets in your mind so that you're thinking everything you do, everything you say, how will he react? Let me ask you," I said, "does he use bad words on you?" "Oh, Father," she said, "they're so horrible I can't even mention them in front of you." Well, I said, "Do you have a job and have some income?" "Well, I had a good job," she said. "I worked very well, but he made me quit. He said I was fraternizing with the men at the plant." So I said, "Do you have any money now in order to maintain the household?" "Oh," she said, "I have to plead for every penny. I don't have enough to buy food for the table or clothing for the children." Well, I said, how was he with you sexually?" "Well, when he wants to be affectionate, he can be." So with her permission, she stepped out, and he came in. And I confronted him about this, and he surprised me because he admitted quite a bit. Not everything, but enough so that I could invite him into our parish program for men who abuse their wives, so he would confront his own abusive behavior and make changes. And I invited her into our parish program for women who are abused so that she would begin to understand the dynamics of domestic violence and have the strength to resist it. This is just one case, one configuration, and each case is different, but it gives us an idea. Now, the good news is that domestic violence is learned behavior. It's not something that we inherit in our genes. We learn it from someplace. Maybe in our family, maybe from friends, maybe the media, trial and error. And that means it can be unlearned. But men and women who abuse their partners don't change easily. They think often that the way they're treating their victims is the best, not only for themselves, but for their victims. They need it. They deserve it. Or perhaps they minimize it or deny that they're even doing it. So they don't change easily. Sometimes they'll make excuses. They'll say, well, I was just drinking a little bit. Or, I've been under a lot of stress lately. I don't have a job. Or I was abused as a child and traumatized, and sometimes I lose control. But these reasons don't explain domestic violence. They can aggravate it, but the explanation or the cause of domestic violence is a decision to exercise power and control over another person. And that is what needs to be confronted. Now, sometimes the abuser will make excuses, or he'll try to blame the victim. He'll say, well, if you had the house better organized and the children better behaved and food on the table on time, I wouldn't get mad. You're the problem. So they blame the victim. Or perhaps there is an explosion and she may end up in the emergency room. Or maybe it's a yelling match and she said, that's it. And he knows he's gone too far. So he's going to come and ask for forgiveness. I'm sorry. I'll never do it again. He may kneel down and plead, cry. And she thinks, should I forgive him? She's a Christian. She wants to keep the family together. So she does. And there could be a wonderful honeymoon period where he's very attentive, brings chocolates and flowers. She's really surprised he's made a change. But then gradually tensions build until another explosion, followed by more remorse, more repentance, more requests for forgiveness. And she's challenged again. Do I forgive him this time too? I've known women who've lived in this cycle of domestic violence for more than 25 years. And each time he says, I'll never do it again, she thinks, well, maybe he means it this time. But often they don't change because it's very difficult. Well, we might say, why doesn't she get up and leave? She doesn't have to stay. But that's difficult also. There are many reasons why women stay. One obvious reason is economics. She may have a job, but she may not earn enough to maintain the family and the children. So she thinks she has to stay. Or perhaps she's too embarrassed. She's never told anyone. And she doesn't want her friends to know because they're going to say, how could you stay with this guy for so long? Or maybe she can't go back to her family because her father said, you marry that guy, don't come back here with your problems. Maybe she's just feeling guilty because she couldn't control the situation. She couldn't change him. She couldn't fix it. So she stays. Many women stay because they've internalized all the abuse. He's told her for years, you're incompetent, you're useless, you're helpless, you don't know how to do anything. You couldn't survive in the world. You couldn't hold a job. And look at you. You're fat, you're ugly. She believes this. Her self-esteem is on the floor. She's walking around half depressed. She doesn't have the strength to separate herself. So she stays. Some women stay because they're afraid. He may have told her, you leave me, you'll pay for it. You'll see. And she knows he's a violent man. He may have a gun in the house. He may even have threatened, I'll kill you, I'll kill the children, or I'll kill myself. And she doesn't want any of those options. So she thinks she has to stay. Some women stay because of the children. They see that the children need their father and love their father, and he may be a very good father. In fact, he may know that if he keeps the children close to him with presents and lots of attention, that she'll never leave. In fact, the children may say, Mommy, we don't want to leave Daddy. And she doesn't have the strength to tear them away. So for the children, she stays. But I always say to women like this, what is one of the worst things you can do for your children? It's to have your sons growing up learning how to be abusive of women And then your daughter's growing up learning how to be submissive to abuse. And then when they find a partner to get married, they could end up in a relationship just like yours. Do you want that? And all the women say, no way. I don't want the children to suffer like me. Well, then you have to be strong. And you have to resist and free yourself and free them. Finally, many women stay because they made a promise at the altar before God that they would stay in that relationship until death. And they don't want to commit a sin. They don't want to offend God. So they think they have to stay. But I always say, can you imagine Jesus walking down the street one day and he comes across a woman with a black eye, her arm is in a sling, and he says, what happened to you? And she said, well, my husband beat me. What do you think Jesus would say to her? Would he say, you got to go back to him and work it out? Or would he say, come with me and I will make you safe? I think that's what he would say. And that's what we have to say as the Church of Jesus Christ. We have to help victims free themselves from this abuse. Unfortunately, our church has been a little complicit in this because we haven't talked about it very much. And I'm referring to us priests. We haven't preached about it. We've preached about marriage, which is a beautiful sacrament, two people joined in love to experience God's love and then radiate that love to the world through their children. It's a beautiful sacrament. But what happens when it doesn't work? We don't say very much. I'm sure many of you have never heard a sermon about domestic violence. I've been a priest for over 50 years, and for more than half of those years, I didn't speak about domestic violence. It wasn't until I hired a pastoral counselor on staff, and one day she said, you know, Father, almost all my clients are women, and most of them are victims of domestic violence. I had no idea, and I knew many of those women, but I didn't see it. She opened my eyes, and that's what we have to do as the Church of Jesus Christ. Now, the good news is that our bishops have written a beautiful pastoral letter. It's called When I Call for Help. You can Google that, it comes right up. When I Call for Help. In the first paragraph, they say, we state as clearly and strongly as we can that violence against women, inside or outside the home, is never justified. Violence of any kind, physical, sexual or psychological, verbal, any kind of violence is a sin, and often it is a crime. And then they conclude that letter by saying, we emphasize that no one is expected to stay in an abusive marriage. Those are words of liberation for many women and some men. No one is expected to stay in an abusive marriage. That's what we have to tell everybody. The Catholic Church does not support anyone staying in an abusive relationship, and we want to help them free themselves from that abuse. Now, I hope that this parish can be a place where people can come and find the compassion of Jesus. That's what we want. We want to have our parish be seen in this entire area as a place where anyone can come. Anyone who has a problem in their relationship, come to our parish, because here there's understanding and compassion, and we will help you free yourself. That's what we want. And we would like to actually help prevent domestic violence by helping our children and our youth understand what it means to form a healthy relationship and be able to recognize unhealthy relationships so they themselves do not fall into them or create them. We want them to live in love and in peace. So in our religious ed program, our parish school, and our marriage preparation programs, we will be talking about the signs that might be indicative of an abusive relationship. Let us all reflect on how we can be merciful as God is merciful, be compassionate as Jesus is compassionate, Help us to make this parish such a place that those who are suffering in silence can come out. Those in darkness will find light with us. Those who are in despair can come to us and find hope, because here we will help them free themselves from all the abuse in their own homes.